I remember just like being anxious and so concerned that something would be wrong with our son that I didn't even fathom anything could be like going on with me. So Jared and I found out that we were having a baby. We went and took a tour at a birthing center here in San Diego, and Jared was kind of iffy about it at first, but once we took the tour, he like fell in love. He's like, I don't want to go to the hospital. He's like, I will be upset if for some reason we have to go to a hospital. So I started to get seen there. At 18 weeks, I went for my anatomy scan, and I remember just like being so concerned that something would be wrong with our son that I didn't even fathom anything could be like going on with me. He was like, it looks like you have what's called Vasa Previa. I had no idea what that was. Jared had no idea what that was. It can be very devastating. That's all I remember. The next day was my birthday, and I'm just chilling at home and decided to Google it. Basically, Vasa Previa is where the vessels of the umbilical cord cross the cervix or are very near the cervix. So obviously, like if the baby tries to come out vaginally, those vessels could rupture and like they're blocking the cervix. 2 weeks later, the birthing center calls me. The report that they got said that I had Vasa Previa, a velamentous cord insertion, and a low-lying placenta. So I was like, what? Like, I thought that I just had this Vasa Previa. Now you're telling me I have these 3 things. So then they referred me to a maternal fetal medicine doctor, and it was like a month later. But in the meantime, I found a Facebook group for Vasa Previa awareness. There was all these different stories. I went to vasaprevia.com. I basically like educated myself in that month. Normally, the umbilical cord inserts into the placenta and is like a tree trunk, whereas with velamentous cord and Vasa Previa, it's like tree roots. So like it's not just one big like lump of a cord. The vessels are unprotected, so they're at risk for rupturing. I went to the maternal fetal medicine doctor, and the doctor told me that I had borderline Vasa Previa, that it was about a centimeter away from the cervix, so my vessels weren't covering the cervix, but they were very close. And she was like, you know, if you were having a baby today, it would be a C-section. I was expecting to get all these answers, to get like a plan of like care, and I left not really knowing like still what was going to happen. 2 weeks later, and I went back and I was seen by a different doctor in the same practice, and he comes in and he tells me, oh, your Vasa Previa has moved. I think you're good to go with a vaginal delivery. I just remember like feeling my heart sink when he told me that it had moved. And you would think that like I would be so ecstatic that these vessels had moved, but I felt like it wasn't right. And I just like, I don't know, I had this feeling and I just wanted to cry. A couple days later, I think, went back to the birthing center for a checkup. You know, it's just too high risk for the birthing center. And I was like, I was honestly fine with it because I had some time to kind of like prepare for that. This isn't an option anymore. Let's move forward and figure out plan B. That was around 26 weeks. That was the last appointment that Jared, my husband, was able to go to. So that was that. And then 30 weeks, I went back to the specialist, told me that Vasa Previa has moved, everything's fine, you can, be cleared for a vaginal delivery, you still have the velamentous cord, but it's not like a high-risk pregnancy. And basically it made me feel even worse than the other male doctor. He made it seem silly that I was still asking about the Vasa Previa and that I was still worried about the Vasa Previa. And so then I left that appointment crying because just the way he talked to me, he made me feel like, oh, absolutely not. You don't have Vasa Previa. Like, there's nothing to worry about. He made me feel stupid. And I'm like, this is a huge thing. Not only could these vessels rupture, but these vessels are fetal vessels. So, like, that's my baby's life. Am I really supposed to just, like, move on like everything's fine and, like, oh, I never had Vasa Previa and whatever? So then I had been transferred to the hospital because now I was high risk, even though my Vasa Previa had resolved. So I was concerned that they never even measured the distance of the vessels again after I was so-called cleared of Vasa Previa. And so she was super nice. She was like, oh, when you come in, we'll go ahead and measure the distance. I can't believe they didn't measure it. We'll just make extra sure that you're good to go. So I was like, oh my gosh, like she took the time to call me. She was great. She was understanding and like wanted to measure the distance, even though in my report I had been cleared. So I went in like a couple days later, they measured it, and she told me like, yeah, it's clear. Like I don't see any vessels, like you're totally fine to do vaginal. But she could like see that I was still anxious. Well, if you want to do a C-section, you can, but it would be elective and we wouldn't be able to do it until 39 weeks. It's like, I can't treat you like a typical Vasa Previa patient, which a typical Vasa Previa patient is admitted early on, like in the early 30 weeks of pregnancy, and then you're delivering by C-section by 36 weeks at the latest. So again, my husband Jared couldn't come to the appointment with me, so he couldn't see the sonograms. He couldn't, listen to the doctor and hear how they were saying things and hear exactly what they were saying. So I had to relay everything as best as I could remember. Basically me just like learning everything and relaying it to him. So that was like extra hard. Like we already had a hard situation, and then adding COVID and him not being able to go to all of my appointments just made it was an extra layer of like frustration. Okay, should I do a C-section or should we try for vaginal? Because these doctors, 3 of them now, have said that I'm good to go. And I really was torn. I had no idea what to do. I ended up getting 2 second opinions, like outside of the hospital that I was established at. And again, they all said that everything was cleared. But I was like 32 and 34 weeks. So they say like as baby gets bigger, it's harder to see down by your cervix. So I still wasn't convinced. I had 5 doctors tell me that I was good to go with vaginal delivery and that I did not have Vasa Previa, and I still just was not convinced. So one day I would like say, okay, we're doing a C-section. The next day I'd be like, no, like I really want to do vaginal. I'm like steady in this Vasa Previa Facebook group, reading other people's stories, asking people what they would do if their Vasa Previa was resolved, looking at the Vasa Previa website. A lot of women were like, Vasa Previa doesn't really resolve. Your uterus grows, so therefore the vessels move a little bit, but they're still exposed vessels, so they're still at risk of rupturing. Some of them lost their babies because like they didn't get the right management for Vasa Previa, or they didn't know that they had it. One of these articles that was published in Australia, Vasa Previa does not resolve. I remember sending it to Jared and we both were like, that seals it. We're doing a C-section. It is not worth the risk. So for me to like start my pregnancy wanting to birth at a birthing center with no medication, no interventions, and then go from like choosing to have a C-section, it was really hard for me. But at the end of the day, it wasn't about me, it was about my baby. I just kept thinking like, what if we try for vaginal and something happens and we have to do an emergency C-section? I just wasn't going to be able to live with myself if that happened. Every day leading up until then, every contraction, whether it was Braxton Hicks or not, every fluid, everything, I was so worried about and I was so anxious. So I remember telling my OB about all of these things that were happening, the contractions, the fluid, all those types of things. And she literally said to me that my body was preparing to go into labor even though I'm choosing not to. Like, this is the best decision. And it seemed like she had supported me, but then when I start, coming to her with my worries, she just kind of like wrote me off. And I felt like every appointment was rushed. She talked over me. She made me feel like all my questions and my worries were like stupid. The day came, July 29th, and I was an emotional wreck. I was like crying the whole entire way to the hospital. So they take me back and they start prepping me for the C-section. And I just remember being like so nervous. I was shaking. I was still crying. It started to happen and it was amazing to see our baby be born. The baby was born, I told Jared to like go stand by his side. It's fine, you know. I had a doula, but she wasn't able to be at the hospital with me because of COVID. Looking back, I really wish that she could have been, because while Jared was over with Eli, I have all these people working on me. They're talking about sister-in-laws and laughing and having a good old time. It's loud, it's bright, it's cold. And I'm just literally laying here by myself, and I remember looking over and seeing my blood pressure, and it was like pretty low, and I was like, okay, don't freak out, don't freak out. I had no idea what was going on, but I really wish I could have had somebody being by my side, like telling me that I'm doing great and everything's okay, because I had no idea. I wanted to see this placenta. I wanted to see what truly was going on inside of my body. And the doctor said that it was definitely developmentis, but everything's fine, baby's fine, no need to worry. Okay, great. So they take me to the recovery room, which was also bizarre, so bizarre. The nurse had told me that she had a developmentis cord, but she was able to birth in the birthing center. She told me that she had never seen a developmentis cord like mine before. She commended me on my mama instincts and for opting for a C-section. She's like, because, you know, if you would have went into labor, you wouldn't have had very much time to get to a hospital. The nurse told me that, but the doctor just told me it was developmentis and everything was fine. My OB had called me while we were in the hospital. All I remember her saying was, your placenta was definitely developmentis, but we're gonna send it off to pathology. Okay, great, because I wanted to know what was going on, and I also wanted other doctors and students to learn about Vasa Previa, and I wanted them to be better at the way they managed it. She left me a voicemail. She couldn't figure out where my placenta was, that pathology didn't know where it was, but that it was, again, definitely developmentis and it looked normal to her, and that she's been doing this for quite some time. She said this on a voicemail, so it's not like I was like challenging her. I was like, wow, and I told my husband, and he was honestly more upset about it than I was. I think I was just over it, and I knew in my heart that I made the right decision, but he's like, they don't know where your placenta is, like that's one of your organs. If you look at it, it is not normal. Like, it is messed up. It's gnarly. And that's not even in my vocabulary, but I look at my placenta and I think it looks gnarly. Did I have Vasa Previa? I don't really know, but in my heart, I believe that I did the whole time. And I did what I thought was right for me and my baby, followed my gut and my intuition. And I'm so glad that I did, because who knows what would have happened had I not found that Facebook group and just listened to the doctors, because I had 5 of them tell me that everything was fine, but I look at my placenta and I think it was not fine. Everyone tells you about how mama intuition is real. At the end of the day, a C-section isn't what my first choice was. That's not the birth that I envisioned. I never thought that I would have a C-section. I never thought that I would choose to have one, that it would be elective. But I just knew in my heart and in my gut that something wasn't right and that vaginal was not the way to go, that doing vaginal would be for me, not for my son. I'm proud of the decision that I made. It caused me so much anxiety and stress during the whole pregnancy, and I wish I would have just enjoyed my pregnancy a little bit more. He was all worth it. Oh my gosh. He's tired. We decided to leave the hospital 2 days after he was born, just because we were over the hospital and the way we were being treated, which wasn't very great. So we came home. My husband did a really great job of taking care of me and Eli, but holy hormones. And being a military family and being out here with not a lot of support, not only do you have this new child that you're learning to take care of, you're learning to breastfeed, then your boobs become engorged and you're trying to figure out how the heck to deal with it. You're bleeding, you are sore, you smell, you have night sweats, like all of these crazy things are just like piled on top of each other. And I think it's hard enough. And then when you don't have like a lot of people around you to be there for you, it's even harder. So I was texting Nicholle all the time and like all my other mom friends, like, is this normal? I'm feeling this way. What do I do about this? 2.5 months postpartum. And I finally feel like I'm starting to feel like myself, even though it's a new version of myself, because I'm a new mom. But I'm finally like embracing motherhood, and as hard as it is, I freaking love being a mom. I just hope my next pregnancy isn't high risk and I can just enjoy it a little bit more. So my advice for anybody with Vasa Previa or velamentous cord insertion or any complication, educate yourself so you know exactly what's going on inside of your body, and trust your gut. I feel like I can trust my gut even more now without question because I did trust it, and I feel like I made the best decision for me and my baby.